Now, the South African Human Rights Commission says it has received various complaints from employees who do not want to get vaccinated and are afraid of losing their jobs. The Commission recently called on people to come forward if they were being treated or threatened, rather, with dismissal or refusal to get vaccinated. The Commission CEO, Tseliso Thipanyane, joins us now, as well as Labour consultant Tony Healy, to talk more on this issue. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you very much for your time tonight here on In Focus. Tony, everyone is, of course, looking forward to living their lives the way that they used to before the pandemic. However, this is not going to be the case, because this is, of course, the new normal. We're going to live with this virus going forward, like we've lived with other viruses as well, and the vaccination process that comes with that. But does this bring or present a new challenge to the labor laws in the country?
Well, good evening. Yes, it most certainly does, as it has and will continue to do so in the rest of society. And I think the current debate around mandatory workplace vaccination policies emanates from an 11 June government gazette, which, amongst other things, looks at vaccination and makes provision for circumstances where an employer may decide, for various reasons, to make COVID-19 vaccination mandatory in its workplace.
Yeah. What is creating this tension in the workplace? I mean, you have those who are saying, we are going for the vaccination, so we want to be protected, and therefore, if you are not going, you possibly could be putting our lives in danger.
Well, the challenge is that there are a number of factors, and very important factors, that have to be taken into consideration. One, of course, are public health imperatives. Second, and very importantly, are employee or citizen human rights in terms of the Constitution. And thirdly, the efficient running of businesses. And the problem is that when you look at vaccination is that those rights are really competing for supremacy in the context of each of those three factors. Because on the one hand, you're going to have, understandably, employees arguing that they have, as they indeed do, very important human rights. On the other hand, there are going to be other issues around the question of public health imperatives, and to what extent, I think, ultimately, the question that has to be answered and will be at workplaces is, to what extent may or may those human rights, may or may they not be limited in the interests of greater society, or in the interests of other employees in that workplace.
Yeah. Tony Healy, in the interest of course, human rights, what happens when there are competing rights in the workplace? Health considerations, as well as employees who all say, well, we have rights to be protected in our place of employment.
No, certainly rights can be limited, and they can also need to be balanced. Our position is that, Section 12 of the Constitution is very clear, that nobody should be forced, to be vaccinated, except where, the limitation clause of the Constitution allows for that limitation. And we are quite aware that, for example, the wearing of masks does constitute a limitation in terms of health issues, and there are no problems there. So we are not sure whether the directive issued by the Minister of Labour really complies with this. So this is what we're looking at this point in time. However, I need to say, as a Commission, we do support people to be vaccinated, and we do support for all efforts to be done to fight COVID-19 and its devastations as far as the economy is concerned. But we need to be very careful that whatever we do is in line with the Constitutional Court, with the Constitution. You'll recall that it's only last week where the Constitutional Court actually ruled that the Equality Act, parts of it are unconstitutional 20 years later. So this balancing and limitation of rights is important, but it must be informed as to how we do it.
Yeah. Now, as far as the occupational health and safety measures in certain workplaces, is there a way in which we can come to an amicable resolution that accommodates all here, those who refuse and those who actually go for the vaccination? Well, how should employers approach this? Dr. Thipanyane?
The policy, the 11th June directive as Tony was highlighting, does provide for those three criteria which must be taken into account when policies are being developed, but also it talks about, a finding of reasonable accommodation where people, feel that they don't want to and it's possible. But second, what is also worrying us is that, we are hearing government talking in different tongues here. The acting Minister of Health, last week was saying that nobody should be forced to be vaccinated. The directive of the Minister of Labour, 11th June, suggests something else. So we do need to engage with the government and the Department of Labour and find a meaningful way. Because as I was saying, we do need to get the economy functioning, but at the same time, we also need to respect the rights of people, and we do need to find balance. And the mask, for example, constitute a very important intervention in the fight against COVID-19. So we're not saying that there should be no justifiable limitation of rights. There should be, as long as premised in the Constitution and takes into account all the requirements of the limitation clause of the Constitution.
So what will be your key guiding principle here? Because there needs to be mutual respect, right? Mutual respect for the employees who are saying, I want to come to work and I want to work, but I will not vaccinate. And those who are saying, I also want to come to work, I am vaccinated, and I want to make sure that everyone around me also protects and respects my rights, right? And then you've got an employer who also has the operations to consider. I want my work to continue and be effective. What will be the guiding principle? I know you're conducting investigations on those employers.
Well, it's really as to how best we're going to balance the interests, competing interests, so to speak, of the employer, but also of the right of South Africans over their body and the psychological integrity, because that's what Section 12 says, that, these rights have to be respected. And we, as people of this country, have passed Section 12, that no one body should be interfered with, except, where the law is very clear. So this also applies to business. So we do have to find a balance in the interests of the country and in the interest of our economy. And the limitation clause basically gives guidance as to how we should go about limiting rights, what factors must be taken into account. So to some extent, the policy directive does speak to those issues. And therefore, if, for example, the directive stands, then it means also how then it is implemented will also be very important, that you don't unduly undermine the rights of the workers, and you try by all means to find reasonable accommodation to the extent possible. But we are still doubtful about the directives, and therefore we are basically looking into this as a commission, and very soon we'll be announcing our position on the directives and also engage with the Department of Labour. But as I'm saying, unfortunately, government seems to be talking in parallels here. The Minister of Health on one hand and the Minister of Labour. So it will also help, if government was a bit more clearer.
Yeah, Tony, how do you navigate that so that you don't unduly, dismiss someone? Because I don't know, what the law says as far as business operations are concerned. Does the employer have a right to say, well, I want my operations to continue in a particular way, and therefore, if you are not going to assist me as far as occupational and health protocols are concerned, we're going to have to part ways?
Well,
sorry, that's Thipanyane. Tony, you can come in.
I'm not so sure the Minister of Health and the Minister of Employment and Labour are necessarily at odds with each other. I think if one, certainly my colleague at HRC has confirmed that the President has stated, and he has, that no citizen will be compelled to take the vaccine. But I don't think that that's necessarily at odds with the directive, because yes, certainly, no citizen will be compelled and no citizen can be compelled to take the vaccination. But I don't think that if an employer makes vaccination mandatory, that is compelling the employee to take the vaccine. What I think we must interpret from that is that the individual still has a choice, still has the freedom of choice, but they would need to understand that in circumstances where a workplace requires a mandatory vaccination policy because high risks of infection and transmission cannot be avoided, then if an employee elects not to have the vaccine, as is their right, then at the same time they need to appreciate that there will necessarily be a consequence to that. And the consequence to that is that, yes, indeed, their services may be terminated, because the directive certainly does talk to the fact that there will be certain circumstances. And those circumstances would be, for example, a workplace where high levels of transmission and infection cannot be mitigated, cannot be avoided. And for that reason, vaccination needs to be compulsory. But my learned friend from the Commission raises also a very important point, and that is that we don't know whether this directive would withstand scrutiny, and time will tell whether it does or it doesn't. But certainly what we're going to see are test cases where, for now, what we're going to see that in some instances, mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policies will be held to be fair, and in others they'll be held to be not fair.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. That's all we leave it for tonight. The CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission, Tseliso Thipanyane, and the Labour consultant there, Tony Healy. Continue in a moment.